5,000. A man said to the keeper of the gate of Aleppo, "I have lived in the Khanqa, the retreat of the Master of the Age in Turkestan, for 20 years. The keeper asked, "What did you learn?" "I do not know if I have learned anything," said the other man. "While I was there, people came and went. Some were dismissed, many were disappointed. Finally, I came away." The keeper said, "There is a great Sufi living beside the small market. Perhaps he may give you advice." The man from Turkestan went to the small market, and when he saw the great Sufi, he exclaimed, "Are you an impostor? For you are none other than the man who, for 20 years, appeared regularly at the Khanqa, sowing doubts about my master in my mind." The Sufi smiled and said, "One of my duties is to test disciples. What better way of testing than to be one of them, grumbling and illustrating their own coarseness?" "But what of the others at that Khanqa? Were all my fellow disciples really saints in disguise?" "The composition of a Khanqa's population is such that there are some ignorant ones, some enlightened ones behaving like the ignorant, and others who are neither. You only see the superficial. In your 2 decades at the Khanqa, 5,000 of the people who made no noise, many of whom you did not even look at, or who seemed unimportant, received their own illumination." The Man and the Snail. A man once saw a snail sitting in a crevice in a wall. He called out, "Hello, snail." Believe it or not, that snail could speak, and it could hear, and it said, "Hello there, what are you?" The man said, "I am a human being." "Are you like us?" asked the snail. "In a way, but there are a lot of things which we can do that you cannot." "Name them." "Well, for instance, you have eyes on stalks. We have stalks on the other end called legs. We have feet on them. By moving the legs and feet, we can cover vast distances in no time at all." "That sounds quite extraordinary. Anything else?" "Well, we have no shell. We don't need one." "No shell? I suppose it is possible. Anything else?" "And we can communicate without words, without even being together. Our method is to take something like, say, a leaf, make a mark on it, called writing, and send it by another human being. Now, by what is called reading, the person who receives it can know what the writer was thinking." The snail said, "The trouble with you, as with all liars, is that you go too far. I have trapped you into overreaching yourself by pretending to believe you. But if I further encourage you by not expressing the disbelief natural to all rational beings, I shall be a partner in your sinful lies." The Doorkeeper. A Sufi was asked, "What are you doing? You do not let us, who want to learn from you, study books. You do not perform rituals, you refuse to answer questions, and you take no heed of praise or blame." He said, "I am a doorkeeper. The doorkeeper makes sure that the door is open when it should be open, and that it is shut when it has to be shut. He permits the entry of whatever or whoever should enter, and he denies entry to what must be excluded. If you want him to make a noise, to bang the door, to create an effect, to wear rich or poor clothes, to hold out promises or to argue, to mime, to accept bribes or to discuss instead of working, you are not a person to have transactions with the keeper of a door." The Letter of Thanks. Idries Shah returned from a banquet at the house of the Prime Minister of the time in the country of Roum. He immediately sat down and dictated a letter to the finest calligrapher in the city, packed with some fulsome compliments and sticky honorifics. A visiting thinker said, "Oh, Sharif, if you send this letter to the minister, he will either be revolted by your adulation and never invite you to his table again, or else he will so fear people's opinion that he was influenced by your flattery as never to offer you a high post at court." Idries Shah smiled and said, "You have judged him well, and your reputation as a philosopher is illuminated by your diagnosis. But your assessment of me seems to have become confused with your own ambitions for yourself. Know, therefore, that being desirous of fewer, not more, banquets, and even less enamoured by the prospect of positions at court, I have composed the letter which you have just heard." The knife. An idiot out on a walk saw something gleaming beside the road. Hoping that it was silver, he picked it up, but it was only a knife which someone had dropped. "I'll throw you away for deceiving me like that into the river where you'll rust to death," he shouted at it. But this was a talking knife, and it tried to save its life by saying, "Good sir, why do you not keep me? I could be useful to cut your bread." "Not likely," said the idiot, "for you could also be used by someone else to cut my throat." The Elixir. One of the great Sufi teachers was asked, "How is it possible to comprehend the teachings of the masters when so much of their behaviour is paradoxical and frequently so very ordinary?" He answered, "General rules and hypothetical approaches block the understanding as often as they assist it. But I shall tell you my own experience, for the records of experience are often the best. When I was a student, I approached the greatest master of the age and said, 'I can only behave like an animal, consent to help make me human.' He nodded his head, and I attended him at his house for 2 years, waiting for a sign of teaching. After this time I went to another wise man and asked him how I could approach my teacher to learn from him. The wise man said, 'You seek an elixir, and I shall give you one. Take this colourless fluid and put a drop in your master's food once a day. At the same time make sure that you serve him and do everything which he says, not for the time being making any attempt to see meanings in his actions or to trick him into conversations.' I did as he said, and after a month I found that I was developing perceptions and understandings. I returned to the wise man and said, 'Blessings upon you. The elixir is undoubtedly working, for I am progressing, and can now do things formerly impossible to me.' He said, 'And is that why you have come?' I said, 'I have also come for a little more of the magical elixir, for the quantity which you gave me is exhausted.' He at once smiled and answered, 'You may now stop giving your teacher drops of inert water, the elixir, and continue with the special behaviour which I prescribed for you.'" The Lion. Once upon a time there was a lion. He had come into being to be a lion, and to pass on lion experience to cubs and other lions. But certain gnats and flies who surrounded him imagined that he was there for their amusement and for their use. The lion, by shaking his head and swishing his tail, prevented the insects from living off him. Although they scattered when he made any movement, they never learned that they should leave him alone, and that by approaching him they were acting through habit and impulse, not reason or effectiveness. One day the lion died. He provided a place of sport for insects, and some of them lived for quite a long time off his carcass. The insects thought that they had won the battle, since the lion did not now oppose them. To them, he was their property. Indeed, thinking insects constructed a system of thought to explain what the lion really was, based on their experiences of the dead body. Because the voice of the lion had been stilled by nature, They and those who heard them supposed that the insect version of the aims and value of lions was correct. This is one reason why so many lions leave behind cubs. Over a sufficient period of time, you see, insects will learn not to trouble lions, and also to go to places where they can get food more easily, which is better suited to them than the carcass of a lion. For one thing, it takes too long for a lion to die, and his meat does not last forever. So it is, too, with Sufi teachers plagued by petty scholastics. The certificate. A certain man had been studying with a Sufi master for several years, having been sent by means of a subscription raised from the citizens of his home town. When the time came for him to return, the master handed him a certificate. On it was written, "I certify that this man has fasted constantly, has suffered extraordinary privations, has performed wonders, and should be respected in every way." The disciple said, "Why should you issue such an untrue and misleading document?" The master said, "Sufis do not exist by outward show, nor by the possession of certificates. But you just try explaining that to people who have paid for outward show and certificates. The people who made it possible for you to come here would be the first to revile you and claim that you had wasted their money if they were not shown their own kind of evidence for your importance." Cheese for choice. "I have chosen," said the mouse, "to like cheese. Such an important decision, needless to say, cannot be arrived at without a sufficient period of careful deliberation. One does not deny the immediate, indefinable aesthetic attraction of the substance. Yet this in itself is possible only to the more refined type of individual. As an example, the brutish fox lacks the sensitive discrimination even to approach cheese. Other factors in the choice are no less susceptible to rational analysis, which is, of course, as it should be. The attractive colour, suitable texture, adequate weight, interestingly different shapes, relatively numerous places of occurrence, relative ease of digestion, comparative abundance of variety and nutritional content, ready availability, considerable ease of transport, total absence of side effects, these and 100 other easily defined factors abundantly prove my good sense and deep insights, consciously exercised in the making of this wise and deliberate choice." Hidden Hand. The Khan Jan Fishan Khan was at one time frequently preached against by a certain mullah of Kandahar. He called for reports of the mullah's sermons and studied them, but he said nothing publicly. Several months after this incident, a traveller arriving from Mazar, one Abdul Qadir Beg, who wrote about it in his memoirs, said, "You were until quite recently preached against by the Sifri mullah, and now I am told he never refers to you at all. Have you changed your ways, or is this magic? What alchemy, what talisman can you have used?" Jan Fishan Khan, says Abdul Qadir, answered, "If you promise to tell nobody until the mullah is no more, I shall confide in you." I studied his speeches and saw that he had contradicted himself. For instance, he objected to my administrative activities on the grounds that I was called a mystic, and my Sufi activities on the grounds that I was called a Khan. So the remedy was simple. I arranged, anonymously and through a merchant friend at the City of the Cloak of the Prophet, that the mullah be appointed advisor to the merchants of Kandahar. Since he has a real occupation now, he no longer has to busy himself with making a noise to attract attention. City of Storms. Once upon a time there was a city. It was very much like any other city, except that it was almost permanently enveloped in storms. The people who lived in it loved their city. They had, of course, adjusted to its climate. Living amid storms meant that they did not notice thunder, lightning, and rain most of the time. If anyone pointed out the climate, they thought that he was being rude or boring. After all, having storms was what life was like, wasn't it? Life went on like this for many centuries. This would have been all very well, but for one thing. The people had not made a complete adaptation to a storm climate. The result was that they were afraid, unsettled, and frequently agitated. Since they had never seen any other kind of place in living memory, cities or countries without storms belonged to folklore or the babblings of lunatics. There were two tried recipes which caused them to forget, for a time, their tensions, to make changes, and to obsess themselves with what they had. At any given moment in their history, some sections of the population would have their attention fixed on change, and others on possessions of some kind. The unhappy ones would only then be those who were doing neither. Rain poured down, but nobody did anything about it because it was not a recognized problem. Wetness was a problem, but nobody connected it with rain. Lightning started fires, which were a problem, but these were regarded as individual events without a consistent cause. You may think it remarkable that so many people knew so little for so long. But then we tend to forget that, compared to present-day information, most people in history have known almost nothing about anything, and even contemporary knowledge is daily being modified, and even proved wrong. People. It is related in the book of Amudarya that a former lawyer, a scholar jurist, who had joined Bahuddin Naqshband, asked him, "You know all about dogma and exegetics. You seem to know all about theory and about what is in books. How can you manage to have all this knowledge when it is not as well developed in academic scholars and in dogmatists?" "Well," said Bahuddin, "I can only say that I learned much more about dogma from sources other than books and arguments, or even from lectures." "What could such sources be?" "I learnt about dogma and scholasticism by studying people." What to shun. Two worthy citizens of the land of fools were talking together. "Do you know," said the first, "that whenever I read the multiplication tables my head starts to swim?" "But this is amazing," shouted the second, "because the very same thing happens to me when I run any distance." Unable to see any common explanation for the two happenings, they took their experiences to the very wisest man of the land. The very wisest man said, "It is obvious that both numbers and running were invented by an undesirable person, and his influence still subsists in them. Therefore shun both."